I met a man named Joe on Facebook during the start of the pandemic, April of 2020. I was in a group which dealt with grief and loss. My husband of 17 years passed last year suddenly from a heart attack. It was shocking, and here I was left alone. We never had any kids, and his death left me totally empty. I joined the Facebook group to find support, and found myself not visiting it very often. In fact, I turned notifications off for the group, as it was overwhelming, and after a while I stepped away. But when the pandemic hit, I found myself isolated at home, and mourning all over again, mostly because I had lots of free time to do so. I worked during the day as an admin for a dental clinic. The dentist's work shut and everything was closed down in early April, and while waiting for unemployment, I had a lot of free time on my hands I didn't necessarily want. Free time left me a lot of time to think. I used to work a lot to keep my mind off the loss of my husband. Busy hands kept my mind from overthinking. With work being stopped and having to isolate in the house, I really felt alone. I ended up going back into social media more, partly out of boredom and partly to find conversation with others. I started visiting the group once more, and that's where I met Joe. I commented on a post someone did about how pain never goes away after a loss. Joe replied to my comment and said that he agreed, or something like that, and then jumped right into my messenger. He said he understood and that he lost his wife 5 years ago to cancer, and it was sudden and unexpected as she didn't know she was sick until it was too far gone to treat. He told me he was a widow and had a son who was 18, just graduated high school, and was going into the Army. He said after his son was to leave the home, he was fearful of being so alone. We struck a conversation and ended up talking for about an hour. He asked me if I had WhatsApp, to which I said something about not even knowing what it was. I was never into any of those apps. My phone was a couple years old, and I didn't do all the modern stuff like the new phone apps, technology stuff. He explained it to me, helped me download it, and he said it would be a better place to talk, as he's not always on Facebook, and it would be better with his work, as he's not able to always sign into Facebook to have a conversation, but WhatsApp is always on his phone. We started to text on WhatsApp. He told me besides being a widow, he was originally from Belgium, and that he had only been in the States for 10 years. He said his mother was also from Belgium, and his father was French. Both had passed on, but he spent a lot of time in both countries during his youth. When I told him I absolutely loved to hear the French language spoken, he started texting me words in French. I told him I don't speak or read French. The first time he called me, he had a very heavy accent which I couldn't place. I asked him several times to speak to me in French as I thought it was so sexy, but he would always change the subject, or he would hang up and say we have a bad connection. He told me he worked as an electrical engineer and was working on a special project in the UK, and due to the pandemic, he was unable to return to his home in California, where he said he was living. He gave me the address to his home in California, and he was always up front, so I never doubted it. We texted daily. He sent me good morning, thinking of you messages, pictures of roses, and good morning my queen texts. He was very diligent with making sure I had a lot of attention. He said he never felt this way since his wife died and thought he could never love again. He even had his son send me an email talking about how wonderful I am and how his father talks about me all the time. His son was going away to the Army soon, and he said he worried about his dad being alone. The relationship continued, and yes, I fell for him. I cared for this man and for his son. His son continued emailing me during the whole relationship, even telling me he was in North Carolina getting ready for boot camp and sending me photos of who I thought was him in training. Joe and I continued our relationship. He was scared of COVID, as was I, and he was isolating in a rental home he says his company rented for him. He even sent pictures of the rental home and of him cooking inside. We made plans to meet after the pandemic was under control. He promised to fly out to see me and wanted me to see his home in California. As we grew closer, like any online relationship, you would get as close as you can from online, I was feeling happy again and sad for so long I kept myself a bit reserved, but I allowed him in a little at a time, which was hard for me to do, slowly trusting him over time. A few times he said he was having trouble with his phone, an iPhone. He explained to me his phone needed iTunes cards to keep going as it's an American number being used in the UK. I didn't know any better and was buying him $100 iTunes cards a few times a month. He promised to pay me back when we met. He said that due to being overseas, his bank card was not working, and the bank was closed because of COVID, so he couldn't even check with the UK banks to see about getting money from his American account or opening an account in the UK. Joe said he would be working soon, but basically was stuck isolating due to this pandemic. We kept talking, sharing late night chats, phone calls. He would even sing to me. His accent I thought was French mixed with a man from Belgium, but really I didn't know. Overnight, Joe would call, and one night he called, which was really unusual, because he usually called me at the same time every night. This was very, very late into the night and early morning. After a while, I didn't hear from him. 2 days had went by, and I didn't hear anything, and he wouldn't pick up my WhatsApp calls. I wrote to his son to see if he knew what was going on. He said his dad emailed him about a problem with his boss. His son forwarded me an email and asked me not to tell his dad that I had seen it. The email said not to tell me, but that his boss was stealing money and they caught him and the company credit card was closed and the bank account that paid for Joe's rental house and Joe had been thrown out on the streets with no money, no credit card or account, all due to his boss pocketing and laundering money. I was upset. I asked his son if he can tell his dad to call me. I was so worried. His son said that his dad wouldn't want me to know he was suffering and told his son, I want to keep her out of it. The son, though, came up with a plan to have me wire money to North Carolina to his commander, and he would make sure the money got sent over to Joe in the UK, and Joe wouldn't know that I helped out in the situation. I thought about it and agreed. It would be perfect because Joe wouldn't know the money came from me. His son asked me to wire $3,000 to his commander in North Carolina, and the commander would get it to Joe and tell him that it was from his son instead as a surprise. His son said he couldn't wire it himself because of being in boot camp. He couldn't leave the base. So I wired $3,000 to this person in North Carolina. It was picked up at a Walmart to Walmart money transfer. I had to send actually 2 payments and split it up. His son told me his commander picked it up and he would make sure Joe got the money. I waited to hear from Joe, calling and calling, but never heard anything. My WhatsApp messages remained unread. 2 days later, I emailed his son frantic, wanting to know what was going on. I've heard nothing. Joe's Facebook profile vanished, and my WhatsApp messages kept going unread. I think he blocked me. I'm not sure. I saved one of Joe's pics and went online to search for it, trying to look for him. When I checked his pics, I found out they were stolen from a man named Sven, and I was crushed. I was informed that there likely wasn't even a son at all, and that it was a scammer playing both Joe and the son. The stolen pics were of a man who'd been used in anti-scam and scam romance for years. The person in North Carolina, where I wired the money to, I was able to find on Facebook. It was a man in his 70s, and I made contact with him. He confessed and told me that a lady named Mary told him that he had won a Facebook drawing and that a woman would be sending 2 payments of $1,500 and that he was to keep one payment and send the other forward to a PayPal account. Bless this man's heart, he was very confused and felt sorry for me that I experienced this all. The PayPal email address he gave me didn't lead to anything, but I'm sure it went overseas to a scammer. As I listened to voice chats with scammers, I realized my scammer had a similar accent, and I now know he was from a country somewhere in West Africa, and definitely was not a French-Belgian man. It left me angry and ashamed. I've closed my heart totally to love because of it, and will never trust another person again. This scammer preyed on my grief, my loneliness, and my emotions. When people ask, how could you become a victim of a scam, I tell them it's easy. They prey on your emotions. Ladies, beware and keep your guard up at all times. Thanks for letting me share my story. I really appreciate it and hope that it helps somebody else.